Right, so for this lesson, we are going to continue our work with building fluency on dividing decimals, and we are going to be looking at how to divide a decimal by a decimal using the standard algorithm. So the first problem that we're going to look at is we're going to look at $4.20 divided by $1.40. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write my answer out into the box. So $4.26 is going to go on the outside, and then $1.40 is going to go on the outside. Now, we talked about in fifth grade that when you multiply a decimal by a decimal, what you need to do is you need to get your divisor to be a whole number. So to get this to be a whole number, I need to move the decimal over 2 places to the right. So if I move the decimal 2 places over to the right, so 1, 2, my rule in math, really, we talk about balancing. So if I do something over here to this value, I need to do the same thing to this value. So I'm going to move the decimal over 1, 2. And then after I move the decimal, I'm going to bring it straight up. So now I'm looking at dividing 420 by 140. So I'm really dividing whole values. So 140 is going to go into 420. It is going to go in there about 3 times. The reason that I know it's going to go there 3 times is I take a look at 14, and I know 14 times 2 is going to be 28. So I think I can get another 14 in that value to get it close to 420 or to get it close to 42. So if I do 140 times 3, I'm going to go ahead and just bring the 0 down. 4 times 3 is going to be 12. I'm going to regroup the 1. 3 times 1 is going to be 3, plus 1 is going to be 4. So the answer is going to be 420. So I'm going to go ahead and write 3 up above, 420 down below, subtract, answer is 0. So my answer for this problem is going to be 3. So, alrighty, let's go ahead and take a look at our next problem. So our next problem that we have that we're going to do is I have 41 and 75 hundredths, and I'm going to divide that into 250.5. And so I'm not actually going to divide this problem out because this is a very large value. But what I want to illustrate is here, I need to look at how many places I need to move the decimal. So I need to move the decimal 2 places over. So it's going to go over 1, 2 to make this a whole number. And when I do that, I need to do the same thing. So I need to move it over 1. I ran out of values, so I'm going to go ahead and add that 0 and move the decimal over 1, extend my line out, and then the decimal gets brought up. So I'm looking at how many times 4,175 is going to go into 25,050. So I could go through and work on this problem, but it's going to take a long time for me to go ahead and go through it, and I'd rather build some fluency using smaller values for you guys. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to move to your guided practice. And so when we take a look at your guided practice, it says on number 1, when dividing 55 and 8/10 by 2 and 325,000, by which power of 10 would you multiply the divisor and dividend? How many places would the decimal point move in the divisor and the dividend? So let's write out this problem so we can take a look at it. So I'm going to do 55 and 8/10, and I'm going to divide that by 2 and 325 thousandths. And so I need to look at how many times I'm going to move the decimal to the left here. Or we're not dividing, so I'm not going to move the decimal to the left. I'm actually going to move the decimal to the right because I need to take this value and multiply it by a power of 10. So let's look at how many places I'm going to move the decimal. So I'm going to move the decimal 1, 2, 3. So because I need to move it 3 places, I'm going to multiply that by 10 to the power of 3. And so it's going to move 3 places to the right. So we just need to remember that we need to get the divisor to be a whole number. And to do that, we are moving the decimal over to the right. And we are able to do that because we're multiplying by powers of 10. And so whatever I do to this side of my problem, so if I move the decimal 3 places to the right in my divisor, I need to make sure that I move it 3 places to the right in my dividend. All right, let's take a look at number 2. It says in another example above, y is a 0 annexed or added to the dividend. So if I take 0 and 35 hundredths and I divide that into 0 and 21 thousandths, what they want to know is, why did I annex a 0? So the decimal is going to move over 1, 2, which means my decimal is going to move over 1, 2, and then come up, and then I don't have to worry about the decimal anymore. And so I look at this, 35 hundredths can't go into 2 at all, so it has to go into 210. Well, 35 is larger than, I'm sorry, 21. 35 is larger than 21, so I have to add a 0 there, and now I have to add another 0. So I add that 0 because 35 is larger than 21, and so I have to add that 0 to have 35 be able to go into a value. So it's going to go into 210 6 times. I get 210, subtract, and my answer is 0. So 21 thousandths divided by 35 hundredths is going to be equal to 6 hundredths. All right, so let's go ahead and do some division work. So I'm going to have 3 divided into 0.6. So the important thing to recognize here is I have a whole number. So my rule when I have a whole number is just to bring the decimal straight up and then not worry about it. Straight up. And then I look at how many times 3 goes into 0. It doesn't go into 0 at all. I look at how many times 3 goes into 6. It's going to go in there twice. 3 times 2 is going to be 6. Subtract, I have 0 left over. So my answer is going to be 2 tenths. Okay, if I take a look at problem number 4, I have 50 hundredths that I am dividing into 2 and 50 hundredths. So the first thing I need to look at is that if I'm dividing by a whole number or decimal, I'm dividing by decimal, which means I need to move the decimal in both values. So I'm going to move it over 2 places to the left. So the decimal is going to come over here, which means I need to move it over 2 places to the left, and then I bring it up and ignore it. So let me just draw that arrow. So I bring it up, and now I'm done. So now I look at how many times 50 is going to go into 250. So 50 is going to go into 250 5 times because I can drop the zeros off. Then look at how many times 5 goes into 25. So I end up with 250, subtract 0 left over. So my answer here is going to be 5. All right, if we take a look at number 5, I have 9 tenths that I am dividing into 3 and 6 tenths. So I have a decimal as mine in my divisor, so I need to move it over 1, which means I need to move this over 1 and up. So my decimal is going to go straight above the 6. 9 goes into 36 4 times. 9 times 4 is 36. Subtract 0. So my answer is going to be 4. Okay, the last one in your guys' guided practice that we're going to take a look at is we are going to take 8 and 8 tenths and divide that by 4 tenths. So because, again, I have that decimal is going to move 1 place to the right, which means in my dividend, it needs to move 1 place to the right, and then we bring it up. So now I look at how many times 4 goes into 88. 4 is going to go into 88 22 times. 4 times 22 is 88. When I subtract, I have 0 left over as a remainder. Practice, and we are going to start by taking a look at problem number 7. So I have 8 tenths divided into 64 hundredths. So we've not seen a problem that looks like this yet. Our problems where we've been having to move the decimal has had a decimal here. Remember from our conversation in our last topic is if it doesn't have a decimal here, we just need to go ahead and put the decimal so we see it. So if I move the decimal 1 place to the right here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a 0, move the decimal over, extend my line out, move the decimal up. Decimal is going to go right there. So now I look at how many times 8 is going to go into 640. So 8 goes into 64 8 times. 8 times 8 is 64. I'm going to subtract. I have 0 left over. I bring down the 0. I look at how many times 8 goes into 0. I don't stop here at 8. I have to finish the problem out. 8 goes into 0 times for an answer of 80. So my answer there is going to be 80. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at number 11. So number 11, I have 52 and 6/10 that I am dividing by 8/100. So here I need to move the decimal 2 places to the right, which means in my divisor, I need to move it 2 places to the right. So I'm going to go ahead and add my 0. I'm going to move it over and up. So my decimal is going to live right there. And now I'm looking at how many times 8 goes into 5,260. So 8 is going to go into 52 6 times, which is going to be 48. I write that underneath and I subtract. And then I'm left with 4. Bring down the 6. 8 is going to go into 46 5 times. 8 times 5 is 40. So I write that underneath 46. Subtract. I have 6. I bring down the 60. 8 is going to go into 60 7 times. And that's going to be 56. I'm going to subtract. I have 4 left over. Add a 0. Bring this up here so you guys can see it. 8 goes into 40 5 times. 8 times 5 is 40. We're going to subtract 0. So my answer here is going to be 657 and 5/10. Your independent practice on math practice and problem solving, you are going to do problems 8 through 14 even today. And then in your math practices, you are going to do your problems. You're going to do 15, 17, and 18.